everybody. Obviously, I'm not Radmila Šekirinska. Yeah, I hope that you can notice that. I'll try to be her replacement. Unfortunately, she didn't manage to come on time. And let's hope that next year many of our colleagues that are not with us this year, that we will gather as every year, because this Korčula School is such an important place for us Social Democrats from the region. Since this is high-level kickoff, I will not put some special questions on the table in front of our speakers, but definitely during this time they will answer on the questions that I will not ask them concerning, first of all, aggression on Ukraine and reflection on this region. This session is intended to set the stage for discussion on differences and similarities on the war in Ukraine and wars and conflicts in our region. We will speak about geopolitics, we will speak about the approach of European Union, United States. We will speak about Russia and China, influence and presence on the Western Balkans. We hope that we will get answer on the question, what is the impact of the NATO presence in a region? And definitely we will speak about EU integration process. I hope that we have Tanya Fayon on a link. Yes, hello Tanya. Some of us will visit you on Bled in coming days, and hope that that event will also be very good one. And right now I'm giving floor for you.
Oh, hello. I didn't expect I will be that soon, but hello to everyone from Ljubljana, from our ministry. It's good to see you, very familiar faces, and Korčula School is always a pleasant event, even though it's also a very important event. I regret not to be there with you, but we have a bit unusual summer, if I may say so, because we didn't have much vacation or summer break because we were severely affected by floods. And that's something I will touch upon because it goes in the context of solidarity for global security, or what is changing also apart from wars and conflicts in our continent. But as I said, we faced severe floods, the worst in our history, in August, and we are still recovering, and we will recover very long. But what I wanted to say and use the opportunity is to thank you sincerely, everyone, for the great solidarity we experienced. I mean, from the day one of floods, people knew and had hopes we are not alone. And this European solidarity gave us a lot of optimism. So we are now recovering. We need this solidarity in the future, but we are at the same time discussing a lot that what are the two lessons we have learned. One is solidarity. We have really to embrace it and work on it. And another is, of course, that we were not well prepared on extreme weather conditions. So we have to be better prepared. The climate change, what is affecting us, we see all around the globe, forest fires, climate change is causing floods on this side of the globe, forest fires on the other side of the globe. So it's also, when we speak about conflict prevention, something that we have to bear in mind and very high on the agenda. But today's topic on Ukraine and similarities with the wars in the Balkans, what I can say, of course, we are now facing more than 18 months a war in Ukraine, and it's something that is affecting global order, something that is affecting food, energy, insecurity worldwide. And even more, the world has changed tremendously. I mean, I was in the last few months working hard on the Slovenian candidacy for the UN Security Council, and I can say that in many talks with global partners, there are several things that came high on the agenda. Is that the world is deeply polarized. Deeply polarized means that we are searching different allies, we are searching different like-minded partners, and the world is changing very fast. So in this context, of course, Slovenia stands very strong in its support to Ukraine, military, humanitarian, material aid, will continue doing so as long as it takes, because no one can by force change internationally recognized borders and territorial sovereignty. This is very clear. In this war, we know who is the aggressor and who is the victim. But we at the same time shall not forget what is happening on the other sides of our planet. And this is the criticism I often heard from our global partners, what is happening in Global South, what is happening in Africa, that we have to bear in mind, if we want to have partners, if we want to secure the world order, if we want to be honest, then we have to equally deal with conflicts all around the globe. And it's a globalized world that in any way affects us sooner or later, every crisis. When it comes to the Western Balkans and the new dimension that war in Ukraine caused, I would say that it's 20 years from Thessaloniki summit, and it is still that we are discussing about the enlargement agenda, and no doubt the enlargement and the Western Balkan is and has to be the priority also for us progressives. We have to keep on moving. We have to think out of the box. Maybe we have to use the opportunity now when we are also discussing about the enlargement on the eastern neighborhood to Ukraine, to Georgia, to Moldova, that we find some new dimension how to bring these countries of the Western Balkans faster through the necessary reforms. And looking to Zoran, I know how painful it is for North Macedonia, the whole process. I know how difficult it is for citizens to still trust in European enlargement. And I don't have a proper answer how to move on, except that to be aware that we are all together part of Europe, and that the globalized world, the challenges that we face, from security to conflicts to food insecurity, energy insecurity, terrorist threats, name it, we need each other in this world, maybe even more than ever before. So maybe just to conclude briefly, Slovenia will, with 1st of October, take over the observer status in the UN Security Council. I'm very glad. What we proved is that our foreign policy, having partners at the table, gave us 153 votes, which is a tremendous support that gives us a big responsibility. We will next 2 years sit in Security Council, and I'm pretty sure that with our partners, work in that regard, we'll work actually for climate change, we'll work for women, peace, security, conflict prevention, and the rule of law. So you can count on us also as a global player, but also as a strong regional partner and a friend of all our countries, and that close in our region needs first and foremost peace and security. So thank you for being here with you. I will not stay, unfortunately, very long with you, as we are preparing for Bled Strategic Forum, and I'm glad to see some of you in Bled in the next days, where we will have 3,000 participants discussing on solidarity for global security.
Thank you, Tanya. And congratulate for your very good work, not just for your country, but for the region also. Right now, good friend of us, Zoran Zaev, you have a floor without my question, but with a clear topic.
Draga Nika, prvo hvala za gostoprimstvo. Fantastična je Korčula. Uživamo svi ovde, posebno kad vidimo i naše prijatelje ovde. Dear friends, comrades, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's a really pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for Korčula School think tank, Olaf Palme and other supporters for this organization and hospitality. Dear friends, the war in Ukraine, for me, is also a war of values. Or more correct, a Russian war against the European and democratic values. But also our battle against terror, conflict, regime, and autocracy. Yes, on the one hand, the war in Ukraine, from the point of view of the Ukrainians and their political and military leaders, is a fight against the aggressor. Fight for the defense and protection of its sovereignty and territory. In that struggle, they deserve all our support and that of the progressive world. But when I say that the war in Ukraine is also a war of values, I mean that it is also our battle, because it is a battle between democracy and autocracy. It's about an ideological war of freedom and unfreedom and totalitarianism as two concepts based on which democratic, open and free societies and closed, captive, dictatorial social communities are organized. With that in mind, the free democratic world cannot be a silent witness to that war, just as it is not a neutral observer of both the conventional war and the struggle of the Ukrainian people for their homeland. That's why we, the actors, advocates of freedom and democracy, must give our contribution in supporting Ukraine in the war of values. Everything necessary must be done for the democratic forces of Ukraine to defeat the symbolism of the vertical hierarchy of autocratic Russia. That victory will also be our victory. On the contrary, the defeat in the war of values, which as such is not taking place only on the territory of Ukraine, will be the defeat of libertarian, open societies. Hence, the resistance to the totalitarian matrix and the unity of democratic forces are the basis for progressive societies to prevail, which I emphasize once again is equally important as the preservation of international peace and stability. Bearing all this in mind, especially important in that resistance are the solidarity, alliance, and unwavering togetherness of the societies and advocates of innovative, open, progressive forces for a gender undivided approach to the values of democracy, human rights, and social justice. From that perspective, I also look at this conference and debate which encourage a free, open, and essential exchange of opinion between the participants for networking, building alliances, and mutual strengthening through the cooperation that is so necessary for us in the war of values. I emphasize this in this way because we see that the other side is taking serious steps to create alliances against freedom. The war forced Russia in search of allies to turn to China, India, Iran, and other BRICS countries, which we know do not have a serious portfolio when it comes to democracy and human rights, which is to the progressive values represented by Western European democracy. What kind of democracy and what kind of human rights can we talk about when we consider the People's Republic of China, Iran, India? All this is another proof that the war in Ukraine is a war of values. Some say that a new balance is being established in the world which instead of bipolar is now becoming multipolar. I would say that a world of clear demarcation between the spheres of democracy and authoritarianism is being established. Why do I claim this, and what should we pay attention to? Paradoxally, but not surprisingly, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine has fueled the popularity of totalitarianism and totalitarian societies. We see how sympathizers of extreme right-wing circles in a number of countries see Putin as a defender of traditional Christian values and an opponent of the LGBT plus community, as an opponent of transgenders, as an advocate of masculine virtues. We also see something else: overlap between nationalism as a derivative of conventional war with the war of values. And it's not a coincidence. They are connected by nostalgia for the mythology past of national greatness and twisted cultural homogeneity in which men are men and women and minorities know their place. Culture wars have become part of today's geopolitical struggles, and the overlapping alliances in these conflicts create strange alliances and sympathies. The fact that, unfortunately, we also see these phenomena in our neighborhood, in Europe, show how dangerous that is. Viktor Orban called for a joint fight against, I quote, progressive liberals, neo-Marxists, intoxicated with the dream of empathy and support for gender equality against those who are on the payroll of George Soros, end of quote. We all know that Orban is widely regarded as the leader of the EU member state most sympathetic to Putin. Dear friends, let me briefly remind you of some events that preceded the war in Ukraine and the war of values. Already at the beginning in 2021, Putin began to prepare the ground for his ideological and, I would say, civilizational clash. In January 2021, Putin passed a law that allowed for the expansion of the list of individuals and groups that can be labeled as foreign agents and introduced new restrictions, registration and mandatory reporting, as well as media obligation to state their status when mention of person or groups of the list. According to this law, anyone can be labeled a foreign agent, including foreign journalists who collect data and information about Russia's politics and defense or cover topics affecting Russia's national security. On December 30, 2021, shortly before the start of the military aggression against Ukraine, Putin signed a series of laws aimed at limiting the operation of the largest American social networks. Civil associations and ad hoc protest organizers were prohibited from receiving money from abroad, and journalists were prohibited from reporting on demonstrations. Putin passed a law granting former Russian presidents immunity for life, not just during their term in office. Russian President Vladimir Putin has signed a law banning a lot of gender human rights. Putin announced that this law protects cultural traditions and family values in the fight against Western ideologies. Putin and the Russian Orthodox Church, one of his main pillars of support, have repeatedly portrayed gender identity issues as a consequence of Western liberal ideology. In the end, as the crown of all these anti-human rights laws, Putin, that is Russia, announced that he would no longer respect the decision of the European Court of Human Rights. Dear friends, All this gives me the right to say that humanity is facing a new Iron Curtain. This time, it is not only territorial and will not divide the world only geographically and along the borders of the states belonging to the free democratic world and the captive authoritarian states. Now, the Iron Curtain threatens to divide progressive societies in which human rights are affirmed from repressive ones in which the law of force, not the force of law, rules. From this perspective, it should be taken into account that just as Western democratic societies and the North Atlantic Alliance were put to the test in terms of security issues and in terms of NATO's participation in the defense of the fundamental principles of peace and security in the world. So the values of the progressive society in which human rights are placed on the altar of democracy to be there forever as an idol are also put to the test. That is why the coalition of progressive forces is imperative for us, because we must not remain voiceless observers of the war of values. Yes, we are facing a new era of uncertainty, but that should not discourage us. On the contrary, it should encourage us to be double alert and ready for a long battle for a friendly and fair balance in the world, and for a dedicated battle for the defense of progressive, democratic, and liberal values. The world is not responsible for Putin's war, but the Western democracies must accept responsibility for whether they live by values that set them apart from the values that are the core of Putin's imperialistic fantasies and ambitions. We must accept that responsibility as our driving force for defense against the aggressive imposition of totalitarian, religious-inspired models that must be defeated. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoran. Thank you for your story about values that you are repeating all the time, and I think that it's never enough. We should have Borko Stefanovic, MP from Serbia, on a Zoom.
Thank you so much. I don't know if you can hear me. I hope you do. And first of all, thousands of regrets and apologies for not being able to be there with you in beautiful Korčula. And of course, thank you so much for allowing me to participate. Just to represent myself for those of you who don't know me, my name is Borko Stefanovic. I'm the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Serbian Parliament, but also I'm a deputy president of the strongest opposition party in Serbia, which is pro-European party, Social Democratic Party, Party of Freedom and Justice. And of course, I was really struck by the speech of Mr. Zaev, which I think it was extraordinary. And of course, there is a line and there is a virtual wall being built across Europe. And of course, it's based on values and differences between those values. But I have to say, to stress once more that those values seems not to be so strictly divided in Europe. So we do have, as Mr. Zaev pointed out, a lot of things that are happening inside of the EU that are actually encouraging totalitarian structure and that are connecting with Putin and others who are pretty much representing the role model for the Western Balkans, which is really toxic and unwanted. So I have to say that since I come from Serbia and we do have a huge inner struggle, as you might know, and we are the only country pretty much that hasn't imposed sanctions on Russia. I'm the only MP in the Serbian parliament that proposes, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, a resolution that calls for sanctions on Russia. Since I don't have a majority in the committee, since I come from the opposition, of course, the notion was defeated by the Serbian Progressive Party of Mr. Vučić. So this is how things stand. 11 years of huge propaganda, This propaganda in Serbia is not pro-Russian. It was and it is still pretty much anti-Western propaganda. So connected with the unresolved issue of Kosovo, you can imagine how devastating the whole setting is in Serbia. And of course, we strongly believe that without democratization of Serbia and without democratization in Kosovo, there is no way that we can successfully resolve the issue of Kosovo to everybody's at least a certain satisfaction, and to bring finally peace and stability to this region, and also to pull out this region finally, probably and preferably as a whole region, to the EU as soon as we can. Now, of course, there is this new perspective to the enlargement. We can feel it in the Balkans. Many of our citizens, many of our people are really disappointed with the lack of expediency and the lack of reform. So there is a lot of responsibility upon our own governments, especially in Serbia, because we don't have EU integration process going on since 2016. So Serbia is absolutely stuck concerning this. And we like to talk to our people in the following way. The reforms that were performed through the PrEP process and through the process of accession to the EU were tough for the people. Now, reforms and chapters or clusters that need to be tackled are tough for the government or for the regime of Aleksandar Vučić. So they have absolutely no willingness, absolutely zero willingness to do anything about any progress or any reforms concerning the rule of law, judiciary, or freedom of the media. So as you know, Serbia is absolutely stuck concerning EU integrations. We are drowning ourselves in rampant corruption and ties with the top brass of the government with organized crime. We are the only country that hasn't imposed sanctions on Russia. We do fully support as a country, and we as a party, of course, territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. We fully condemn Russian aggression on Ukraine, but there are no sanctions. And to make things much more, let's say, interesting, and maybe for this panel as well, every EU official or Western official coming to Belgrade seem not to push for this. So we have a unique situation. Good old our autocrats in power are our autocrats. So we should preserve them and protect them. There is a blind eye on everything that our regime is doing inside of Serbia. If there is any critique coming on Mr. Vučić, it comes through Kosovo lens. When it comes to Kosovo lens, the only critique is about Vučić being non-constructive and not efficient, or let's say being destructive concerning Kosovo process, which we all know since we lived for 11 years in a tough, almost impossible position of opposition to him. So I have to say that the approach which is ethnic, the approach which is one-sided is not helpful. Actually, it is devastating the remnants of pro-EU sentiments and energy remaining in Serbia. And without that energy and without that willingness, not only that Serbia will not join EU, I think that it would be devastating for the whole of the region. So Serbia should not and must not be ignored concerning this situation. So how should we approach this? Well, first of all, I think our Western friends and our Western comrades and allies should start imposing the same messages that they've been saying, privately, to start saying them publicly. And finally, that we see that what is expected from Serbia concerning alignment with European foreign policy concerning Russian aggression in Ukraine. We don't see it. So the good meetings and tapping on each other's shoulders will not resolve any problems. Actually, we do have many delegations coming and talking about, quote, enormous, unbelievable reforms happening in Serbia, good factories, good foreign investments, etc., but no really talk about necessity of inner reforms, media freedom, rule of law, freedom of our judiciary, and not to mention one of the top issues, which is necessary alignment of our foreign policy with the rest of the continent. Serbia and the Western Balkans, I believe, we do have a unique opportunity in this new world that is being created in front of our eyes. in the place in which we are on the right side of history this time, all of us. So we need to finally circle our continent and to finally become one family, especially in the eyes of this huge threat that is coming not only from Moscow, but from various other, sometimes remote capitals. And that's why I believe that what we are seeing now, to a certain extent, is a mixture of hypocrisy and a good old giving a blind eye to everything that is happening. And I have to say, since I'm now humbly passing the voice of democratic European Serbia to you, we believe there is no solution for Kosovo until we do democratize Belgrade and Pristina. There is no solution for EU integrations until we do have the same approach to reforms and necessity to liberate Serbia. And there is no progress if Europe allows Alexander Vučić to play on both chairs, as he likes to speak about Serbian chair, but actually the Serbian chair is a chair of isolation, corruption, brutality, and violence. So that's why we have thousands of people in the streets every week, even during August, and it will continue in September. And we are fully determined, pro-European forces, progressive forces of Serbia, to continue with our joint struggle and to keep on connecting among ourselves and creating a strong, powerful answer to Mr. Vučić's devastating policies. In the same time, we are all in the Western Balkans a little bit tired and disappointed by the fact that there is no encouragement, speedy process, package approach to the Western Balkans concerning EU integration. There is no any form or shade concerning the fast track. There is this serious lagging for the Western Balkans that is now becoming quite obvious concerning the expediency for Ukraine and to a certain extent for Moldova. So we would not like to stay on the side of the road. We are not determined and willing to be left outside of the process that is part of our DNA as nations, as countries, as history, as culture, and as economies. So we are absolutely ready to participate and to bring Balkans, and we need to bring Balkans much more together than now. So I will finish with a reference to the Open Balkans and Berlin process. As you understand, two competing projects. One of those projects, which is Open Balkans, is, plainly speaking, about trucks, and Berlin process is about projects and money. So we should do something to merge them together instead of allowing capitals to quarrel which one is better. And also, those processes in the Western Balkans should give guarantees for countries to join, not in order to repel them. So we should give guarantees that their sovereignty and territorial integrity would not be put under question. We should form a joint chapter and secretariat in order to speak to Brussels with one voice. We don't have time. Time is slipping away. Corruption and poverty and everything that is happening is actually fueling huge waves of immigration from our countries. In the same time, with one eye, we're looking what Bulgaria did to North Macedonia. We are absolutely frightened what, let's say, might happen to Serbia concerning Croatia. And you can imagine if we have autocrats and people like Vučić still in power, or let's say Mr. Orban in Hungary, or some other guys in Poland, for example, how the whole thing might evolve. So the whole story about uniting values and standing as one against the Russian aggression and autocracy, pales away compared to having the symbols of destruction, of killing democracies in our own entities. So what we are saying to the world is actually we are fighting fire with fire. We are actually nurturing pretty much small copies of Putin in our entities, and we are saying to our citizens, hey, we're almost there, and we're almost there for more than 25 years now. So I think it's time, it's the high noon for our European friends and us to get stuck and to get deep into this process and finally expedite processes concerning joining European Union for the whole of the Western Balkans, of course, Ukraine, and all of our other friends, because if the right time, if there is any right time, the right time is now. Thank you so much, and I'm really honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Borko. All of us, we know that it's not easy to be opposition in Serbia these days. So all best in your future work, and you should know that all of us in the region share some of your frustrations. Right now, we should have former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sweden, Ann Linde, on Zoom. I see her. Before I give you floor, dear Anne, I want to thank you once again for everything that you did and that you are doing for our region. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here. And of course, it's an honor to be in the same panel as my friend Soran and Tanya. And I listened very carefully to what you said. I'm not in Korčula because right now we have a conference with Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and the Arena Group here in Stockholm on European perspectives on the war in Ukraine and the new security landscape. And I held a keynote yesterday about how to deal with Russia. And I guess all of us is wondering how we are going to deal with Russia. But now in this session, I am concentrating my intervention to lift the gender perspective. So important both in the wars in the Balkans and now in the war in Ukraine. I think we need to do so many things better from a gender perspective when we deal with the Russian war in Ukraine than what we did in and after the Balkan wars. Since UN adopted the Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security more than 20 years ago, we know more about how important it is to include women in all aspects of peace and security. Conflicts and the use of arms disproportionately affect groups that are already in vulnerable situations and often highlight issues of power, cultural expectations, divisions of law, of labor, and family reproduction. The first step, I think, is recognizing the importance of actively addressing and acting on gender issues when talking about defense and security policy. The gender dimension to peace and security is not a separate agenda item. It's not a side event. It has to be part and parcel of our policy. So I would start with the sexual and gender-based violence. We know that rape is used as a terrible tool in wars and conflicts. The war in the Balkans, particularly the conflicts in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia and Kosovo during the 1990s, witnesses significant instances of sexual and gender-based violence as part of a wider pattern of human rights abuses and atrocities. The SGBV, I used the abbreviation, it means the sexual and gender-based violence, was used as a tool of war to terrorize and control communities. And it has severe and lasting impacts on individual and society. SGBV occurred on a large scale during the conflicts in the Balkans. Women, men, and also children of all ages and backgrounds experience various forms of sexual violence, including rape, sexual torture, forced prostitution, sexual slavery. It also targeted individuals based on their ethnicity, with the intention of inflicting shame, fear, and psychological trauma. Sexual and gender-based violence was not merely a high byproduct of the conflict. It was often used as a deliberate strategy by different warring parties. Women and girls were targeted for sexual violence to undermine the enemy's morale and to ethnically cleanse certain areas. I have over the years made several trips not only to the Balkan but also to Ukraine, where I have talked to women to better understand their experience of the war they have faced since 2014, not just the last years, and how we best can continue our strong and long-term support. These conversations have been tremendously important to shape the actions that we have to take. I know what the Russian aggression against Ukraine has meant for many women long before the invasion in February 2022. When I worked for an end to the Russian aggression together with all other partners in Ukraine, I hear the voices of the strong Ukrainian women that I have met, and it spurs me. An issue that we often forget is the trafficking. During war and conflict, sexual violence and trafficking in persons increases. Women and children are often hit the hardest, both in the Balkan wars and now during the Russian atrocities towards Ukraine. So when many women and children was and is victims of trafficking persons for the purpose of sexual exploitation. It has horrendous and serious crime that violates the human rights of its many victims. The vast majority are women exploited in prostitution. Many of them are children. I think we all agree that it is awful and it is deplorable. The adaptiveness of the criminal networks involved in trafficking is unfortunately very evident. I have met organizations fighting trafficking that report on the presence of traffickers in Ukraine, as well on the borders and in countries that are receiving Ukrainian refugees. But what will happen when it comes to a peace agreement eventually? Well, women are chronically underrepresented at key forums where decisions on, for example, disarmament and non-proliferation are made. And because of this, we collectively lose important perspectives. Research shows that peace agreements where women took part is more sustainable. Another important fact is that if women are not at the table, crimes like rape and gender-based violence will not be considered part of the peace agreement that demands accountability. It will be seen as a quote-unquote ordinary crime. It boils down to this: get the women in the room, in the peace negotiation, in the open, but also in the back channels. Get gender issues in the mandates, into the sanction regimes. Already we have seen too many pictures from discussions about Ukraine with nearly no women in place. And having been a part of a government with a feminist foreign policy, it did not feel very good also to see last week when President Zelensky visited Sweden, and the official photo was from the Swedish and Ukrainian delegation was 15 men and 1 woman. In the Balkan wars and now in Ukraine, we can see that the sexual and gender-based violence makes this crime against humanity and the war crimes under international law. But we have not been good enough to call for accountability. The survivors of the sexual and violent and gender-based violence in the Balkans faced not only physical traumas, but also emotional and psychological scars. Stigma within their communities, lack of access to proper health care, legal challenges further compounded their suffering. But the perpetrators did not get to take full responsibility for their acts. We see in Ukraine now that there are unspeakable reports of rapes in Ukraine that have to be taken seriously and be investigated. Those responsible must be held accountable. When I, as a foreign minister, together with the others like Tanya, met with the head of the ICC, he told us that one of the problems was that they don't have investigators that know how to investigate rape and sexual violence. And that is something that we need to help them with and to send experts. Otherwise, the perpetrators will not be held responsible. This is part of a wider task where Russia's violation of international law must be investigated. There are initiatives taken by ICC and the UN Human Rights Council, and of course the OSCE and the EU to this end. And we as politicians and NGOs and think tanks, we need to lift this issue to the table. We need to push for accountability and we make it visible. When I talked about the Ukrainian war and these issues for our parliamentary group, afterwards, one of our parliamentarians with his background in the Balkans came to me and he said to me, I have to tell you, don't miss this out because there is still so many traumas and stigmas for women who experience this in my country, one of the Balkan countries, and others, and they never get their life back as before. And the least we could do is to ask for accountability for the perpetrators. So I think here we have a lot to learn from, especially what we did wrong in these issues in the Balkan wars, now when we are dealing with the Russian terrible illegal war in Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. And now we are back here in the room. Romina Cuco, Deputy Minister of Interior. The floor is yours.
Thank you. This is Western Balkans cooperation. Actually, when I was thinking about the topic, it was the issue of resemblances between the Western Balkans and Ukraine. And I had 3 points of reflection regarding these resemblances. First of all, the regions, Ukraine and the Western Balkans, share a commonality that even in the Western Balkans we have countries which all of them are not part of the EU, of course, they have not been integrated into the EU, and some of them are not part of NATO. Secondly, we know very well that if some countries of the Western Balkans attempt to try to have an accelerated integration efforts into the NATO, we are going to have the reaction of external forces of Russia exactly the same as it was in Ukraine. The second commonality is that both country and the region are isolated. So it's a commonality that we share. We don't participate in any initiatives which are substantial to the integration. And of course, we still are very, very far when it comes to integration efforts. And the third is about the projection of power. Of course, in Ukraine, we have a lot of projection of power according to the geopolitical concept, and the same is in the Western Balkans, meaning that if there is a certain need to tease the waters, either Ukraine or the Western Balkans are the perfect platform to do so. And I heard before that we have to think outside the box now and to see how the European perspective, have you noticed that we talk about the European perspective for many, many years and all we see is just the perspective, but we actually don't see the European. And I think that we should probably stop asking to think out of the box, but we should go back to the box and take some very bold decisions and not talk about perspectives, but just take some bold decisions that require a lot of courage from both our countries in the Western Balkans, but also from the EU. And of course, there is this concept that our countries will fall into autocracy. I prefer the word democratura, which is a democracy coupled with a dictatura. But the question is, why do we have such kind of influences in the Western Balkans? Is it the fault of our DNA? I don't think so. Is it the fault of any other processes that happen? I don't think so. I think that we have done a huge mistake of not capacitating our youth, and I think that this is a very great cross-cutting point where the EU can take a very bold, let's say, action into capacitating the youth in order to try to integrate the region, even on the mentality aspect, these 10 centimeters that we have to reform. So I think that when it comes to reforms, the region has given quite a lot of proof. And Mr. Zaev here is one of our heroes when it comes to the reforms that our countries did for the European integration by definitely changing the name of the country, which is something unbelievable when it comes to the 21st century politics. But it was a very worthy reform, a very worthy sacrifice, and we understand, all of us, with a lot of cost, even on a personal level. And the same is with Albania. The problem is, where is the answer? Where is the deliverance from the European Union? And what are we waiting in order to gain this kind of stability? And when it comes to the stability, we spoke about the open Balkans, and I don't share the common idea with our colleague from Serbia, because the open Balkans for us, or as Mr. Kurti said, the open balcony, as long as it's not an open volcano, we don't care about the pun. But the open Balkans was actually a kind of operational branch of the Berlin process. We know very well, and this is something that I have to explain, that for some time the Berlin process stopped. It was not a moment of continuation. So that was an initiative from our countries in order to show that we can integrate with each other, we can cooperate with each other without the need of an external arbiter. It was not a competitor of the Berlin process, it never was. It was just a process to demonstrate to the EU that we can actually find a common language and cooperation in the region to integrate it without having the need of an arbiter. And now that the Berlin process took the pace again, and we are going to have the summit of the Berlin process in Tirana this October, and we're very happy to host it, it will show that, especially in our countries, in Albania, the North Macedonia, but also Serbia, we have quite a lot of MOUs and documentation which is signed, which has accelerated the process. But of course, there is a lot of divide and rule in our countries, and we do not have to omit the fact that external forces utilize some political parties into meddling and creating some issues, even in the sense of the narratives that are mentioned. So I think that this is something that we need to discuss thoroughly, and at least the Social Democratic Front should reject any kind of meddling that happens in the political parties, because they are the largest platforms that can convey a kind of ideology that passes through the individuals. And we know that we are a region that we produce more history that we can consume. So what we need is a quantum leap in the region by simplifying things. We do not need to complicate a lot of things, and I don't think that we need a lot of perspectives. We know which the perspective is. All we need now is to have a clear and bold action. So I think that values are the core and are very important into the integration processes of the region. But on the other hand, I think that we have to be pragmatic in the sense that meanwhile, life goes on, the years pass by and generations change, while we still remain isolated and without participating into the most important part of the driving force, which is the economy. So there is a lot of leverage that can be done, and there is a lot of work that can be pushed through, especially on cross-cutting issues like the climate. This is a platform that we can cooperate with each other, since we do not have a divided sky above our head, but it's our common idea. The last point, that in CEE Symposium in Crete this year, the title was fantastic. I loved it. It was the Icarus syndrome, and we all know the myth of Icarus and the flying. So what happens now is that the Western Balkans has these winds of wax, and when we try to fly high, then the EU burns our wings. So we either have to change the material of our wings, or we do have to find a pace in order not to fly high. But what can be said for certain is that the path towards integration into the EU remains uncertain. Thank you.
Thank you, Romina. Where is deliverance from EU? I note this, maybe it's a good question for the next panel. And right now, Dash, what is our
agenda right now?
Where we are.
I have a very pleasant agenda. So at the end of the session, before we break for coffee, and of course, starting a meeting is always like having birth, but giving birth. I would like to finish on a note that actually Romina mentioned in her intervention on the courageous efforts that I will say Macedonian government did under Zoran. This has been, you have been an inspiration to us and a ray of hope very often in very challenging situations in the Balkans. And therefore, and above all, Zoran has been the first president of a social democratic party in the region and in Europe, broader Europe, and also a prime minister who has signed the CEE Gender Network gender equality platform, regional gender equality. And for that, Zoran, we would like to give you this certificate of appreciation from all of us, with the hope that we'll keep on doing it all the time and together. And thank you for coming. It's not an easy trip, but thank you to all for coming. Let's have some coffee. And then we have a two today very interesting and charged panels.